Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, who wanted to get a little extra pin down love on the episode today as he eloquently named this episode The Pin Down with our guest. Just had to give Wes a little bit of fun there, as you know you're getting busy in the content creation world when you start misnaming all of the different podcasts that you do. But you guys definitely should be listening to Wes and Blake over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel with The Pin Down Wednesday, Thursday nights. But today we have one of the best Pistons content creators there is, guys. There's so much to go around here. You got to be reading Omari at the Free Press. You need to be reading my stuff at the Motor City Hoops Substack, but you have to be listening to this guy daily. Subscribe to his YouTube channel where he's breaking stuff down from the Locked On Pistons podcast. Not looking at us right now, Ku, not making eye contact as I introduce him. You can explain that to the listeners. Our guy, Ku Khail.
So, first of all, thank you guys for having me. Always have fun with you guys. But second, so before we started recording, I had to ask Bryce and Omari how they record. Are able to look at the camera while can they see me while they're looking at the camera? Because I have a monitor on one side, a monitor on the other side, and then my camera right in the middle. So it's always a constant battle to look at who I'm talking to, but then also look back at the camera and make sure I'm looking at you guys who are watching. So it's a constant battle back and forth I've yet to be able to defeat. So.
It's funny, I never picked up on that, but now, that's all I could see is you looking back and forth from the monitor and the camera. I never thought about it that hard. It was that's just the cool aesthetic kind of gazing off into the background a little bit.
It's not me gazing off. I don't want to.
So I notice it because I am very reliant when I'm recording with somebody, which is all the time, on their interaction. So at times whenever I look at Omari, whenever it's just Omari and I recording, and if I can tell he's doing something else, it actually affects me. I'm like, Omari, you're come on, lock in. And I think that's why I say your name all the time. People call me out all the time for talking, and I'll be like, Omari. And I think it's just a trigger of I want to make sure we're still locked in communicating. So I had noticed it with Ku, but I thought he was always just looking at a different monitor, looking up stats or something like that.
No, yeah,
I look up
stats on one monitor, but this one right here where I'm looking right at you guys. So that's a big thing for me too, Bryce. I want to be able to look at who I'm talking to. But then I started to realize I'm not, they probably think I'm not looking at them. They probably
All right, real quick, Derek Brown says, man, can't wait to watch this episode. Let's go. We have some other comments we will get to later. Harry says, what up, though? Bump says, happy Sunday. We'll talk about Cade. We'll get to some of these. I'll star some of these other comments early. We'll get to them a little bit later. I want to start here, Ku, with vibe checks. That's kind of what we always do here on the Pistons Pulse in the season. I want to look at the immediacy, the last few games, right? Obviously, coming off a win on Saturday night was really good to get that, so we weren't having to talk about a, 4-game losing streak. But we had the loss to the Sixers last Saturday, lost to the Bucks in that big in-season tournament game on Tuesday, the loss to the Celtics on Wednesday, a few days off, then they beat the New York Knicks without Karl Anthony Towns on Saturday. Where are your vibes just over the last week before we really spread out and look at the whole season?
So vibes overall are fine. I said it yesterday, this team, certain players on this team are quite literally a roller coaster, not just game to game, but possession to possession. It's crazy what some of these players put you through watching game to game. But the team overall, I think, over the last 2 weeks or so, they've struggled a little bit, and I think there's some changes that might need to be made. But overall, I think that fans probably should still feel better than maybe anticipated, because I think, what are they right now? 10-14, 10-15?
10-15.
Yeah, so I think still, even with how they've lost a few of these games over the last few weeks, I always go back to, if I looked at the schedule before this season, did I think that they'd be 10-15 at this point? And for me, no, I didn't think they would be. So it's always that kind of perspective I want to keep, whereas, yes, they should have been some games that they could have played better, should have won, and definitely shouldn't have put such a lackadaisical effort out there. But then also I go back to, where were they at compared to where I thought they would be? And at the end of the day, they are still ahead of where I think they would have been. So I always try to keep in perspective. So I'd say that overall vibes are fine. But if you watch Cade's Instagram live yesterday, you think vibes are immaculate. You think that it's they just won the championship, which is great to see. But
Yeah, they are still on a 33-win pace after the win last night. I kind of looked at it late last night, and this is the quickest they've gotten to 10 wins, at least in the last 5 years. They started off 10-14 last time they made the playoffs, and that's the same track they're on now. So, obviously still a lot of season left, but I think you look at where this team's been. We don't need to talk about last season, but even before last year, they weren't getting win number 10 until the end of December, right? So, they're several weeks ahead of pace compared to where they normally are. And they had a really good win last night. This is a well-timed episode, because that was probably one of their best 4 or 5 wins out of the 10 they've had so far.
Yeah, Ku, what did you think about 2 games in particular? You and I talked about the Bucks game and, before that one was played. So I want to get your thoughts on how that one went, what you may have learned from that, if anything in particular. And then 3 games in a row, they lose. Vibes are kind of struggling a little bit overall. And then again, a really nice performance, especially from Cade. Malik Beasley really hooping. No Karl-Anthony Towns, but still a very good Knicks team. Specifically, those 2 games over the last week, just kind of your thoughts and takeaways from what you learned from those.
Yeah, so let's start with the Bucks game. The Bucks game, thankfully, the Pistons actually hooked me up with tickets. Shout out to the Pistons for me to get there. So I was there live, pretty good seats right behind the Pistons bench. So you got to see, and Bryce, you know this, Omari, obviously you know this, you're at every single game. There's things that you pick up on when you're at games that you won't pick up on when you're watching on TV, such as people talking on defense, calling stuff out, all that kind of things. The game against the Bucks, I thought they came out with the right energy, and they knew that it was a big game. They came out acting like it was a big game. Duren especially came out, was playing really hard in the first 6 minutes or so. But after that, I think what ended up happening was the Pistons continue to show that they struggle to guard bigs that can spread the floor. And as the game just continued to play on, that became more and more and more of an issue. And to be honest, another thing is that the Bucks kind of just flexed their muscle. This is not the same Bucks team that was struggling the first, 11 games when they were 2-9 or something. It wasn't the same thing. This team is starting to win. I think they've won 6 straight or something. They had a good win streak at one point. And obviously they have Giannis and Dame. And those 2 guys just kind of flex their muscle on the Pistons, and that they just don't have anyone to really guard Giannis. And Dame, and the way the Bucks are assembled, really exposes some of the weaknesses the Pistons have on their roster. They just don't have the personnel to match up against the Bucks. And so I don't, part of it was effort by some players, I would say, or just lackadaisical or mental lapses, I'd say, by some players. But overall, I would say it was more so just a better team with the better players kind of just really making their impact known and just suffocating you. So I think that's really what happened in the Bucks game, though. Again, they could have played a little better. Some players really could have been, I'm sure we'll probably talk about some of these players, but certain players can be a little better. But I think the Bucks mostly just flexed their muscle on the Pistons. And then the game yesterday for the Knicks, I think, again, going back to the point of the Pistons not being able to guard stretch fives, they didn't have Cat, and it made it a lot easier to guard the Knicks. Jericho Sims made it to where the Pistons maybe could, I think Greg Kelso even pointed out, they kind of had some players roaming on defense, didn't really have to concern themselves too much with Jericho Sims, which really allowed them to play much better defensively as a team. But I also would like to say that I think Cade really set the tone defensively from the get-go. As soon as the tip-off happened, there was a lot of talk, especially from Brian Scalabrine on the Celtics broadcast a few nights ago, that Cade wasn't playing as much defense earlier in the game, and he took a lot of heat for that. So I feel like he really set the tone against the Knicks early, and then obviously had a spectacular game. I think he was the best player on the floor. So I think when Cade plays like that, you're going to win a lot of games. And I think that's mostly where my good vibes are coming from, is that Cade is playing spectacular over the last few games.
Last night's game, the best game Cade's played this season. I'm going to go, just between the efficiency, 15 assists, 3 turnovers, the pull-up threes. I want to talk about his pull-up threes a little bit, because that's the shot that kind of separates all the good guards from great guards. And just every single time he had space, I don't think they undered him on screens too much, but even, but he just attacked whenever, he wasn't met at the screen. And he's been on a hot streak since he came back from that back injury. But I just thought last night, and we kind of talked about it on your pod yesterday, Ku, but if you watch last night and you still don't think Cade is a primary playmaker, then I don't know what to say, because he was phenomenal all night.
Real quick, Ku, he had 29 last night and 17 shots. That has to be one of his more efficient games. And to your point, Omari, it was 5 of 8 from 3, quite a few of them, the pull-up variety. And I'm glad you mentioned it wasn't because they were going unders, because he was using the screen, they were getting hung up on it, and then he was getting the shot off before they could get there. He also got to the free throw line 7 times, and he made 6 of them, which Cade is sneaky, not shot well from the free throw line this year. He's actually under 80% even after last night, assuming the stats are updated this morning on B-Ball Reference. But the 15 assists, 3 turnovers. I'll look at B-Ball Reference's game score for him and see if it was just based on that. But what were your thoughts on his game last night, Ku?
I thought he was absolutely spectacular. Again, Omar, like you mentioned, people who think that you should take the ball out of Cade's hands, I'm just going to continue to question like what's going on. But he was spectacular yesterday. I think it probably was his best game of the year. Maybe. I think there's 2 other ones that I think of. The game earlier in the season, I forget who was it. Let me not speculate. I'll look it up real quick.
Here, let me tell you, and maybe this. So if you just look at game score, which is something on B-Ball Reference, we don't have to get into it. It has the Wizards game is the second one where he was efficient, had a triple-double. It is the Wizards still. The Bucks game is actually the third. That's where he had 35, but on 34 shots. The Celtics game is actually fourth. He had a really good second half, almost had a triple-double there. Pacers game, Bulls, Hawks, second Pacers game. I mean, he's had quite a few good games. He's pretty good at basketball.
Pretty good.
But he's okay. So I don't know if any of those were the ones you were thinking of.
No, yeah, I thought there was a game earlier in the year when he didn't necessarily play make as well, but I thought he did. I think he scored like 34 or 33. I liked his scoring in that game. I did like his overall game against, I think you mentioned it, it's slipping my mind. I think it was the Knicks earlier in the year, the other game against the Knicks. Or no, the other game was his other triple-double he had against, what team was this? Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, the Hawks. He had a triple-double against the Hawks in a win also.
Yeah, I like that game from him as well. But yeah, this is definitely one of his best games of the year, if not the best game of the year. He was in that first half was maybe the most in control I've ever seen Cade of the Pistons
100%.
Offense.
Yeah,
like it's like he had the cheat code to the test. Like it was crazy. He was answering every single defensive coverage, everything that the Knicks defense threw at him. He was making the correct read, and he kind of spoke about it after the game in the locker room. He talked about how he felt like he had the answer to everything the Knicks threw at him. He just felt like there was nothing they could do to really stop what he was doing. So I thought he looked absolutely spectacular. His pull-up threes, I've been talking about it for 2 years now. That's the thing that's going to take him to the next level. And this year, Jackson Frank tweeted this out. He's shooting 37.2% on pull-up threes. So you'll absolutely take that. He's just about at 40% overall on threes. He's shooting much better even on catch-and-shoot threes. I said it yesterday. I think I said it to Omari as well. Bryce, I think we even hit on it on the podcast last week. I'd like to see Cade's three-point attempts even go higher. Like, I'd like to see him shoot more than 6, 7 a game. Like, let's get to 8, 9, 10 a game with how he's shooting them. I think that would be probably a better way, in my opinion, for him to reach the efficiency everyone wants him to get to. Because right now he's trading a lot of mid-range looks for threes and shots at the rim. And even with the shots at the rim, they don't have to be made field goals. He's trying to get free throws. And a lot of times this year, it hasn't translated to free throws, and it's really hurt his efficiency. So I wonder if trading some of those for threes when he's shooting like this would help his efficiency even more, at least until he starts getting the respect of the whistle.
Wes brings up, per NBA.com, over the last 6 games, Cade Cunningham shooting 4.5 pull-up three-point attempts, making 2.5, which is 55.6%. I don't think 56% is sustainable, but I think 4.5. I'm with you. I think 8 is probably a real number. Give me 4 pull-up three-point attempts from Cade, and I would love to see him get 3 or 4 catch-and-shoot attempts. Like, I consistently put in my notes that I wish some of these after-timeout actions would be designs to get him catch-and-shoot threes the way they do sometimes for Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. I think that would be a way to get Cade Cunningham going, get him a good look. I also want to quickly point out, Omari, so Cade has played 21 games this year, and he has scored 20 points or more in 18 of them. So, like, he has been a very consistent scorer. 21 games, he has 10 or more assists in 12 of those 21 games, with a couple more 9-assist games and an 8-assist game. Like, he has just been very, very consistent with the way he scored the ball, the way he's distributed the ball. So, and I also want to shout out, I didn't think he was a great matchup for Brunson. A lot of that was the foul trouble stuff. Like, that's the scary part of putting him on someone like Brunson, or we saw it with Jaylen Brown. If you want to see a clinic tape closeout, he had one last night that was beautiful. I believe it was on Deuce McBride, but he rotated off the ball, closed out, made 2 different efforts to cut him off, and then the Knicks turned it over. Beasley got the box score still, but Cade made the play. I just think his growth defensively, and there's still room, but I think his growth defensively needs to continue to be highlighted because it has been real as well.
And I'm looking at his consistency just across the board. He has not scored fewer than 15 points in any game this season.
Yep.
He has had, as Bobby Buckets just mentioned, he has 10 plus assists in 11 of his last 14 games. And in his last 8 games, he's taken at least 9 threes in 4 of those games, and at least 6 in all of them.
Nice.
In all except 1. So you're seeing, as the year goes on, he's shooting the ball better. He's shooting more threes. His turnovers have been lower. He's dishing more assists. Like, it's just pretty much been a pretty steady incline, I think, from week to week when you look at his percentages and his overall efficiency as a passer as well.
You know what's crazy, Bryce, is that you brought that up. I had a listener DM me this morning. I woke up and got this DM. It says, "Hey, bro, been a fan of Locked On Pistons Fears, but I have to tell you this. Look at the 8:58 mark in the fourth quarter and look at the defense Cade played. I think it's the best closeout I've ever seen Cade have in his career."
Love it.
So I think you guys might be talking about the same play.
I timestamped it over on the Substack, so I'm going to pull it up right now.
If he had multiple, that's even better for Cade.
So, yeah, I kind of hope it's not the same one, right? Because if it, like you said, if it's not the same one, what did he say? What mark?
The 8:58 mark in the fourth quarter.
Nope. Seriously, go watch this closeout and multiple efforts on McBride at 8:45 fourth quarter. Wait, what did he say?
He said the 8:58 mark. So it might be that might be that possession.
In the fourth quarter, though?
Yep.
Yeah, so it had to be the same play. Sometimes I don't worry about I just get close with the clock. But yeah, I mean, it was really, really good. Stayed in front. Like I say, Beasley got the steal, but Cade made the play. So I didn't intend for this to become kind of the Cade love fest. I think it's much deserved. Any final thoughts on Cade vibes, what needs to happen, anything like that before we move on? Because I think we need to talk Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Malik Beasley, some of that stuff. So, Ku, final thoughts on Cade before we move on to some of those other guys.
Yeah, my final thoughts is I all-star him. If he's not an all-star, I'll be pretty mad. So,
I mean, listen, I think he's finally in the conversation. This is the most realistic all-star they've had since I've been able to talk about it. I shouldn't say we, me and Omari. Ku, you've been doing this your whole life. But like Jeremy Grant, I think that first year there was a little bit of a case, but I don't think it was super realistic. It's hard to keep somebody that's averaging 24, 9, and 7 off an all-star team. And here, like, sadly, what's going to help him is what's happened in Orlando. Like, that sucks. It really, really sucks. But yeah, Halliburton not playing well, the Orlando guys being hurt, the Sixers guys being hurt, Maxey not he's still getting buckets, but that team not winning. I think there's a better chance than maybe what I even thought. So it would be really, really cool. That would be awesome to see. So let's go to a break because I'm sure as we get into this other stuff, we'll take up plenty of time. When we come back, Omari, your choice. We can ask Ku about Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, wherever you want to go. You're up after this break.
We are back with segment 2 after talking about Cade in segment 1. And we're going to dive into somebody else. And I'm looking at Ku like that's how spicy do we want to go to lead off segment 2?
Don't just be. I think we should.
We'll ease into it. Let's start off with Jaden Ivey.
Don't do that. Don't do that for him.
Omari knows which one will cause the stop.
Don't do that for him. This is ridiculous.
Let's talk about J.I. real quick, and then we'll talk about
softball, man. This is messed up. You're supposed to give him the change up and see how it goes. See if he'll take it.
It's Sunday. It's Sunday. We got to ease into it, Bryce. We got to ease into it. It's early.
I mean, the fans need something. The best team in the NFL is not playing today. They already got their win this week. Like they need some spice in their Sunday. No, Jaden Ivey, Ku. Jaden Ivey.
All right. So my thoughts on Ivey. He's been better this year, 100%. This is probably what people expected to see mostly last year from him with Monty, but obviously that didn't happen. Overall, again, I want to make it clear, I think he's had a good season overall. However, I think what needs to be, I think, Omari, me and you talked about this yesterday. Bryce, I think you kind of hinted at it earlier. At some point, the Pistons are in year 5 of their rebuild. Cade's in year 4, and he's looking this good. At some point, we have to have broader discussions without it being like an insult. Like, at some point, we have to have broader team-building discussions because Cade is, 23 right now? I'm just going to stay specific to Jaden Ivey. I think he's too inconsistent at times, and especially when Cade's off the floor, he was one of the players I talked about yesterday. That was a roller coaster. There was a 4-possession spree in the fourth quarter. Turnover, made 3. Turnover, made 3. And it's just like each time you're like, no, yes, no, yes. And it's just like, dude, like, can we just, I'd even take a steady play of just, okay. Like, I take that than like the mind breaking turnover and then a great play, then it's a roller coaster. But he's been much better this season. Just a little, I think his inconsistency has hurt them at times. He struggled over the last few games, but he hit some big shots yesterday to keep the lead while Cade was off the floor. So that's big time for him. Overall, I think Pistons fans should be overall pleased with this play, but I think inconsistency seems to be an issue with him right now.
So real quick, Omari, and then I'll let you go. Just looking, points aren't everything, but we talked about the consistency of Cade's points, right? So Ivy's had a season high of 28. That Wizards game was one where both those guys played really well. But of his 24 games played, he only has 8 with 20 or more points. And then he has, 7, 8, 9, something like that with 15 or less, including 2 below 10. So would you say that Cade's lowest number was 15 this year? And they don't get the same usage, but Ivy gets plenty of usage. The inconsistency is really the thing here. And again, I think I want to dive into this a little bit more when we get into the broader conversation. I think what you said is fair, though. Like, it's very inconsistent, and it does matter. Like, that's important to notice and talk about. So sorry, Omari, go ahead. I just want to get those numbers in real quick.
No, I was going to say it's been an interesting season for J.I. in the sense that you look at his overall numbers that he's averaging 18 points, 45 overall, 38 from 3, almost as many turnovers as assists. So that's, probably something we'll talk about. But just scoring wise, it's been a leap forward for him. I feel like now that we're 25 games into the season, it's like, okay, he's kind of figured out the scoring aspect of it to an extent. I thought it was really big for him to hit those 2 threes late that, New York's pushing, trying to, complete the comeback. And both of those threes were just daggers, right? Because a 16-point lead in today's NBA is probably what, a 9-point lead used to be like 10 years ago, and they helped him stay on top. Like, you're seeing those moments of growth from him as a shooter that I like. I think it's just the playmaking aspect that you still want to see a little bit more of. I thought he had some really nice passes in the first half playing next to Cade, but you saw the game shift in that third quarter when, Cade had 4 fouls. He took a rest and, the offense just kind of stagnated. So I know we're going to get into that aspect of it later, but that's one thing I do want to see from J.I. this season is at the very least, you have to cut out the turnovers, right? I think you could be that secondary playmaker the team needs. You don't have to be Chris Paul. Like, if you just cut out the unnecessary turnovers, I think that's more than half of it right there. And, I think for this season to be a true success for him, that's his next area is to cut those turnovers out.
Real quick, Ku, Wes says he also has 3 games with 6 or more turnovers and 6 games with 2 or less turnovers, just to continue with this roller coaster of what we get from him. So I know you had a thought, but wanted to get that in real quick.
No, yeah, I mean, that's just really where I'm at with Ivy is that overall, are you cool with what he's done this year? Yeah, but it's just been, it's been high and then it's been low, and it literally goes possession to possession. It's not just him, it's the other player that Omar was going to ask about, but it's high, low, high, low. It's possession to possession. It's crazy. But overall, yes, I agree with you, Omar. His scoring has been much better this year. Crazy enough, his finishing still isn't where you'd expect it to be.
Yeah, and that's a good point, too.
His finishing still is not the greatest, but his shooting has been better from beyond the arc. And he still draws a decent amount of free throws for the usage that he has, so that keeps it somewhat level-headed. But I mean, yeah, I think Ivy's been fine this year. Just inconsistent, and really, I think he's been struggling over the last week and a half or so, too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely with this guy, I want to see the whole year, right? The next guy we're going to talk about, maybe some people have already lost patience. J.I. has shown enough improvement, especially after how last year started, where, like, that was just crazy, emotionally, mentally for him. I'm willing to see. Also, for everybody who always says Benedict Mathurin and Shaedon Sharpe, I get it. I think we would have some worries about those guys if they were in Detroit as well. Like, I think they would be getting the same criticism. I'm not saying they wouldn't be better fits, couldn't be better fits. And I was a huge Mathurin guy. Benedict Mathurin has a negative assist to turnover ratio and isn't good defensively. Shaedon Sharpe is shooting 28% from three right now. Now, he did come into the year hurt, only 15 games, all of that. But even as a career, he has a lower three-point percentage than Jaden Ivey. All I'm saying is I think we're quick to say those two names. And I'm not saying they might not be a little bit better, but I don't think that they're perfect in the way that we think sometimes. And I love Benedict Mathurin. I know you were a huge Shaedon Sharpe guy, Ku. I'm not saying that Shaedon Sharpe wouldn't be better. I'm just saying it's not like that was light years better based off what we've seen thus far. It may still prove to be that. I just don't know that that's like, it's just a crazy, like this would 100% be it. We'll talk about what we think J.I.'s perfect role is whenever we get to the end of the episode and even maybe what that means for his contract. I want to go ahead and throw the change up here and see where we can get you. Jaylen Duren, Ku. Jaylen Duren, where are we at? What are your thoughts, man? Because listen, I want to give a real quick caveat with Jaylen Duren. Everybody's talking about him getting beat in transition, right? He gets smoked in transition, fouls, gives up the N1, then doesn't box out for whatever reason on the free throw, essentially gives up 4 points. I do want to point out, Isaiah Stewart got outran by Ariel Hookporty later in the game as well. So Duren's not the only one that it happened to last night. I just want to give that quick caveat. But not Duren's best performance. Where are you at? Is he growing anywhere? More patience? What do you think?
I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm getting pretty close to just being like, I'm done. Like the crazy thing is I don't want to be done because he threw me a solid and shouted me out. So I appreciate, he did me a solid. So I don't want to be, but it's becoming harder and harder and harder for me to realistically say you shouldn't be like done. Yesterday, Bryce, I'm telling you this right now, you as a coach, I want to know what your reaction would have been.
I was pissed.
No, not even just like it's not the fact that he got beat on the box out.
He didn't step in.
It's the fact he just didn't move. Like he just
straight up, I would have called a timeout and subbed him out. Like that would have been my reaction. And if it was Cade, I would have done the same thing. You can't miss the box out after you got beat in transition, Ku. You can't do it. Here's the other thing. Everybody remembers that play. There was one earlier in the game where his man is jogging back on offense, and so he's just jogging back on defense. It's Jericho Sims at half court line. He's not a threat there. Cade gives up a drive, which he shouldn't have, but because Duren jogged back on defense, he wasn't there to help on the drive. He should have been back and ready to help. So it's even things like that where I don't even think he recognizes it. He won't be there whenever it's a floor spacing big in transition, but when it's Jericho freaking Sims, he decides he wants to stand at the 3-point line. It's like it's not clicking, man. You know what I mean? It's not clicking, Ku.
I don't know look, so I've said this now about one of the concerns about Duren has been like last year, for example, I saw a lot of Pistons fans and I get it, but I saw a lot of Pistons fans comparing him to Drummond, young Drummond when he first was drafted to the Pistons. Super raw guy, 18 years old, both of them super young, et cetera, et cetera. And I said last year, the difference is, and Omari, I don't know, were you a beat writer by the time Drummond? You weren't a beat writer yet,
You
right?
were after, right?
I started like right after they traded Drummond. So like my first day was like April 6, 2020 or something like that. So like right when the pandemic hit.
Were you in Memphis yet by the time?
I was in Memphis. Yeah.
Okay. But Drummond showcased flashes and was much more impactful already as a 19-year-old defensively. Whereas Duren, I don't feel like there's ever been more than like a 2 to 3 game stretch where he's legitimately like flashed defensively.
Whenever I think about Drummond, just while I'm thinking about it right now, he stole the ball from Dwayne Wade on back-to-back possessions. It was late in the game, but I just always think about that. Like his hands were so quick and his feet were so quick that he got 2 consecutive rips on Dwayne Wade. But just to your point about seeing those flashes, Ku, about seeing the ability.
Drummond's hands defensively were quick as hell. Like they were so fast that Stan Van Gundy built an entire defense around him, playing aggressively in the pick and roll because it created turnovers and all that kind of thing. So while Drummond, my overall point getting to this was that Drummond flashed those things young, and you were like, okay, he'll be able to do this. I feel like, and correct me if you guys disagree, but I feel like for 3 years, it's mostly been just wishful thinking. Like, there hasn't been much shown on the court to believe that he's going to be good defensively, that he's going to improve defensively. It's mostly been, well, he's athletic, he has long arms, he should be able to do these things. And when we haven't really seen him do it consistently for more than like maybe a game or two. So the play yesterday, Bryce, was enough for me. There's been not only that box out, but I don't know if you guys know, but the offensive possession before he did that Euro step, like the Pistons were starting to lose ground, and he just took a play from the high post area, just try to drive in and Euro step and miss the floater, and then immediately comes back down and does that. Like, that was enough for me to be like, look, you can't play the rest of the game, bro. Like, you just cannot come back on the floor after that. Like, it's just too many stretches like that where it's just like, I'm close to this being completely out. And I don't want to be, because he's only 21, but it's like, at some point, it can't just be wishful thinking. At some point, you got to give something on tape for me to like build around, and you're just like, you're not doing that.
Okay, real quick. Omari, I know you got thoughts. We got to get to, but real quick. First, I want you guys to answer this for me. Think about it, and I'm going to give some stats that Wes put in the chat. How many times do you think this year Duren has had back-to-back games with double-digit rebounds? So that's my question. You guys have an answer. Back-to-back games with double-digit rebounds. Hold on. Drummond year 1 averaged 2.6 stocks. Year 2, 2.8 stocks. Year 3, 2.8 stocks. Duren, 3-year, 1.6, 1.3, 1.7. So to your point, just not as disruptive. Okay, how many times this year has Duren had back-to-back games with double-digit rebounds?
I know his rebounds are down, and typically he has a double-digit rebound streak going, and I can't think of any significant ones he's had this season. So I'm going to say 2. I'm going to say 2.
Like, you know how indicting this is. You know how bad this is. This is a question. How much can you guess and say 2 as well?
It is 2. The answer should be like 12. It should have been 12 straight. So since we've done this on the pod and it wasn't like intended, we looked at the point consistency of Cade versus the point consistency of Ivey. How about the rebound consistency of Jalen Duren, who had a 22 rebound game in a game where he gave up a bunch of points, but nonetheless, and then has had a 4 rebound game. And yes, minutes vary a little bit, but he's only had 9 games where he had double digit rebounds this year. And I believe this would be 10 or 11 where he's had less than double-digit rebounds. It just
to back up your point, there's 2 games that really just cannot happen with the rebounding department. The first one is that game against the Hornets, against Diabate.
Oh, yeah.
Ending of that game, all the talk was, the Pistons should dominate the glass. Duren should really be great at the end of this one. They don't have Mark, like, all this stuff. And he gets, like, they just got outplayed by Diabate. And then the second game, just a few games ago, he had the same amount of rebounds as Payton Pritchard.
Payton Pritchard is nice, though.
He is nice. He's nice, but he's not drumming with the glass. He shouldn't have the same amount. The other night, Cade had to have the most rebounds on the team against Boston, and he had the same amount of rebounds as Payton Pritchard. Like, that just can't, like, those things cannot be things uttered out my mouth. It just can't happen.
Not when you're not a stretch big and you're not very good protecting the rim, you have to dominate somewhere, and he's not doing it in the area where he was at one point. Sorry, Omari, get your thoughts off here, because
no, I mean, you guys mostly hit on it, but that's the conversation that we always come back to with Duren is to be a modern big. If you're not shooting, then you have to dominate the paint. And defensively, you have to either be a true rim protector or a guy who can like roam. You've got to be one or the other. And I think most bigs have a hybrid of either just being elite rim protectors, or you could just kind of allow them to do whatever. And maybe you have some, strength behind them. But guys like Jaren and Evan Mobley, you got to be able to do one of those 2 roles. And Duren's just not there yet. So, you're sort of in an awkward spot where it's like, yes, he's 21, but he's also in year 3. You have extension talks with him and Ivey next summer, and then you have one more year essentially to figure out, is this somebody we could build around, or do you move on? So especially with a new coaching staff, a new front office, this isn't the group that drafted him, right? This is the group that brought him in that, initially saw the potential. So he's one of the players I'm keeping an eye on really just through the rest of this season, not necessarily from a transaction trade standpoint or anything, but just more so like he's probably one of the guys at the top of the list of we have to make a decision at some point on if he's going to be part of the future or not. And again, so much of that for him just comes down to what he is or isn't doing on defense.
Real quick, I want to shout out Roy Bushick watching on Facebook. Good family friend here. So I always appreciate the personal connections whenever they connect on Facebook. Before we go to break, I want to ask this to both of you. What's the answer? Well, we're going to get big picture next segment. We can talk trades, what's more important, all of that. It's going on in the chat right now. I love it. No trade. You can't say trade for a center. Let's just say they keep the big man position as is. Ku, Omari, what do you do? Do you continue to start him and say, hey, you're either going to figure this out or it's going to continue. You're going to continue to be the topic of every Pistons episode until you figure it out? Do you start Stu? Do you start Paul Reed for a few games? Let Stu stay on the bench and bench Duren for a few games and see if that sends a message? Where are you at on that pendulum right now, Ku, of what you would do? You can't just trade him or trade for an upgrade right now in this scenario.
I think you have to sit him. I think at this point, I'm starting Stu. I have the concern of Stu's finally found his role as a backup five and he's thriving in it. But you could make a legitimate argument, and it's one that I would agree with. And someone commented this in the chat, like having a better starting center would be more impactful than going and getting like a BI. I agree with that. Like it's gotten to a point where you could legitimately make the argument that Duren is costing them games. Like his play at the five position is losing them games. And again, I said this to Omari on the last podcast that I don't think it would be as big of a deal or noticed as much if it wasn't this big of an immediate change as soon as he leaves the floor. As soon as he leaves the floor and Stu comes in, it's literally like what I think I said to Omari last episode. It was like 17-point swing from when Stu comes on the court with the same starters to when Duren's playing with them. Like it can't be that drastic of a swing and continue to have him starting. If you are, you're letting everyone know, and maybe people are fine with this, but you're letting everyone know that you're valuing trying to develop him over trying to win as many games as possible right now.
Yeah, by b-ball references on-off, he has the worst on-off outside of Tim Hardaway Jr. And, J.I.'s a negative, Holland's a negative, Fontecchio's a negative, but, his is negative 5.2, Isaiah Stewart's is 1.6. And, Cade's Beasley's is the best, actually. But, yeah, it's interesting. I kind of like this from Bobby Buckets. Start Asar and Stu instead of THJ and Duren. Use Asar in those creative ways. I've always said if you're going to play Asar, pairing him with Stu, you both know how I feel about starting Stu. I feel like then the fan base is going to hate him because he's not the starting center they want. But I think Wes says start Paul Reed for a week, keep Stu on the bench, and see if that truly sends a message. Just like hey, you're going to take a week off. If you need to rest, get your legs back, whatever, here's your chance. Omari, same question to you. You can't make a trade. We're not doing that right now. We can talk about that after the break. Where are you at? Would you continue to start him? Is it time for a message? What do you think? What would you do if you're in JB's shoes right now?
Yeah, I mean, you have Paul Reed, who, was good enough to start, games, played all 82 for a good Sixers team last year. We've seen Paul Reed in limited minutes. He knows how to play. He knows where to be on defense. He's about to be a good backup center. We know what Isaiah Stewart can do. So if you have the guys on the roster, then to me, that's just a real rotation adjustment you make. There's really no reason to have a guy like Paul Reed if, you need a Paul Reed and you're not playing them right. So, I would just call Paul Reed's number, maybe just start Stu and go from there. But again, I think the other combo with Duren is obviously winning games this season while also finding opportunities for development. And I don't think you need to play Duren 30 minutes a night for him to develop. He can still find minutes here and there, but if you have guys who are getting it done and it's just a simple question of that, then to me, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea, too. We see some teams where a guy gets to start and, he plays the first 4 minutes of the game and then he sits, he starts the second half, plays 4 minutes, and then kind of maybe it's just really limiting the minutes and getting a true three-man rotation with Paul Reed. We're going to go to break. When we come back, I'll put the question I would like to start up on the screen, Omari. We'll start there because I think it'll really drive the rest of the conversation, but we'll get to that right after this.
All right, we are back with segment 3. And Bryce, I believe you're going to tee us off with a question here.
Yeah, so from Colin Wood, Pistons Twitter is always talking about a BI trade. An upgraded center would be much more impactful in my opinion. So we're going to go big picture now, okay? Ku, go wherever you want with it. I know you started to with J.I. Omari, same thing. We're 25 games into the season. I think all of three of us are on a similar page. We're like, this has been good for our expectations. We like the vibes. I don't think it's unfair to start look at what the next steps are. We feel like we're starting to get some real data on who Cade is, who J.I. is, who J.D. is, how this team could look if you have real scores, real floor spacing, that type of stuff. And quite honestly, a week from today, guys, the trade deadline kind of opens up. Guys become available. So this is going to be part of the conversation around the NBA. This specifically, Ku, I think this is the two biggest needs. Which one do you think is more important for the near future, etc.?
I think the easiest way to get more wins is an upgraded center. I think that would immediately translate to more wins. Having someone that can impact the team defensively. I mean, again, like I say, it's that big of a difference when just Stu's on the floor. I don't think anyone thinks Stu's like a starting center right now. So, I think that's the quickest way to get immediate wins. But at some point, what I was saying earlier was, at some point you gotta have these broad discussions. You have to go beyond just. I mean, Cade's in year 4. Cade is 23 years old, and we're seeing him play the best basketball of his career. We're seeing him continue to take the next steps. At some point. You have to, at some point, it can't be about evaluation and patience. At some point, you have to go out and actually try to win games. You actually have to try to go out and take that next step. And I think you can't do that unless you feel good about your main guy. And I think everyone feels good about Cade. I think he's playing the best game or best basketball of his career right now on both sides of the floor. You have to do something. At some point, you have to make a deal. Or not make a deal. You have to do something to get that second guy with Cade. I think that's maybe most important for me. If you go across and you just look at all the other young guys across the league, I think it happens. I mean, you can name whoever. Once that team feels like, okay, this guy's here, he's good enough, they go out and get somebody. Whether it's Tyrese with Pascal, whether it's Devin Booker getting CP3, whether it's you go across all the.
I mean, honestly, the Knicks just did this with Brunson, right?
Yeah.
Once they felt like they had Brunson, they went all in, to the extreme, but the same idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everywhere across the league. Once you feel good about your young guy and you think he's here, you go and get somebody. You go and get a legitimate guy who doesn't have to be better than him. Maybe he is better, but it's at least on his level creation-wise, at least on his level impact-wise, so you can start having a chance in these games. Right now, I feel like I don't want to go too far into this. I don't know if you want to bring it up later.
No, let's go. We're all in wherever it goes.
J.I. and Jalen Duren, I think, are giving you a pretty clear picture, in my opinion, of what they are. I think Jalen Duren, without some massive change, he's not going to contribute much to winning right now. It's not going to happen. Jaden Ivey, I think, is showing that he's made these steps as a scorer, as a shooter. However, do you want him? Is he someone you want as your 2? Or do you want him to be like your 3rd, 4th scorer? Do you want him to be that 6th man off the bench as just a pure scorer? I think Ivy has clearly carved himself a role for the Pistons right now. Like, out of all the players, I think he's carved himself a role at the Pistons. Doesn't mean he's like untouchable. If you can trade him to get like a superstar, obviously, no one's untouchable. But I think he's the one that's cleared up and carved his role with this team that you can feel good about. You can put him in situations, you know where he can thrive at, and he can help you win games. Outside of that, you need somebody who can be that second guy with Cade, and I think that needs to be priority number 1 at some point, especially, like you mentioned it earlier, Bryce, if you do go the route of, okay, we're just going to continue to start Jalen Duren because we're worried about development. What's that saying to Cade, who's playing like winning basketball, who is playing well enough for them to win games and try to fight for this play-in, if you're just going to send the message of, well, we're not really worried about winning, we're just trying to develop again. Like, it's year 4. At some point, he's going to get tired of this. He's going to get tired of hearing winning doesn't matter, we're just trying to develop. Like, at some point, you get enough data to know, look, we got to move forward. We have to take the next step at some point.
I think Cade has pushed this thing forward. I agree with you. I think the idea of, do you go all in on the number 2 option right now or the stretch big or whatever is interesting, because I think I agree with you. And Cliff in Clean's Kettleball says J.I. is not ever going to be a legit number 2. I don't want to say ever, but I think we've seen quite a bit that I don't feel as strongly about that as I did at one time. I think I put it in my notes somewhere that I think probably is the number 3 type of guy, like your 3rd starter, and then maybe still kind of run a bench unit. Maybe that's what he ends up being, a real number 2 scorer, maybe number 1 scorer, depending on how you want to frame it, whatever, is what the team needs. Cade playing this well finally seeing it for this amount of time pushes things forward. Omari, which do you think? Do you think they need to go get that number 2 scorer? Do you wait and see if Holland shows more, if Asar shows more, if J.I. shows more? Or is it the center position where it doesn't look like they have a legitimate starting center right now? Or as people brought up with Miles Turner, who is an unrestricted free agent this offseason, I don't think that's as crazy of a possibility as what you may think, because Indiana is in disarray right now. Is that more of the play? Where are you at between those two things?
I'm a little bit in the middle. Ku, we did talk about it a bit on X last week where, there's so much talk. And even on your pod yesterday, like there's so much talk about veteran PG, this and that. When really it's just like you look at the Milwaukee game, right? Like they had Giannis and Dame. Like that's what you need. It's not veteran point guard. It's another guy that strikes fear to the heart of defenses, right? The Pistons are at that point. I don't think it's a point where you need to solve it this season, per se, only because one, there's a pretty good draft next year, so I don't think you necessarily need to take yourself out of the running for that unless you're essentially where the Pacers where it's like, we're going to make the playoffs anyway, so we might as well try to make that a leap from playoff team to contender, right? I think the Pistons are somewhere in between those two zones. But after this season, if you feel pretty firmly that Cunningham is your one guy, then at that point, and we've talked about it on the Pistons Post a lot, Bryce, but it's just consolidating at that point, right? Like we know that we want Cade. Like he's already under a max deal. We're going to build around him. You have guys like Ron Holland, Asar, you still have Sasser. Those guys have time. You don't need to make a decision about them, this season or even next summer, right? They still have a few years to develop and whatnot. Becomes a little bit more pressing with guys like Ivey and Duren, where it's, are these guys who could potentially contribute to winning down the road? Yes, but do you make financial commitments to players who, probably more so looking like role guy ceilings? And I think that's the debate you probably have going into the trade deadline. Do you consolidate now or do you wait till the offseason to make those moves? And I think a lot of that just comes down to where they are record-wise. If they're still in a 33-win pace at the deadline, I'm not making that trade in February. I'm going to wait till the summer. If you're at a 40-win pace, then okay, maybe you make the trade then because you don't want to be in that weird spot of, we're in the lottery, but we also lost in the play-in, right? Going to maximize your odds to actually get into the playoffs at that point. So it comes down to record. And if we actually in a month or a month and a half, I'll probably have a much firmer idea. But you're at the point where that's a real conversation you start to have right now for sure.
So, Ku, you don't have to give me a name. We've all talked about the names, but I see people saying like, yeah, we need to do this. The Pistons need to do this, but BI costs too much. Zach LaVine costs too much. This guy doesn't make sense. Like, what is the ideal archetype then? Like, let's say J.I. is at least in the plans, right? J.I., Asar is obviously in the plans. Ron Holland somewhere in there. Because I do think those guys are important for your defensive end of the floor, Asar and Ron Holland. But I think a big-time scorer helps, hopefully, J.I. continue to improve defensively. We've talked about Cade's defensive improvement. And eventually you get better at the center position. What is the guy? What does that look like? I kind of thought like what we saw from Malik Beasley last night makes a lot of sense. I am more interested in a volume floor spacer like that. Not necessarily Beasley, but a volume floor spacer, off-ball bucket getter, than I am another guy that comes in and handles the ball as much. I don't think they need a guy that takes the ball out of Cade's hands as much as others do. I think I'm in the minority there, but I think Cade does it a lot. J.I. can do it a little. I still think Asar is going to be able to do a little bit. Where would you be in terms of just the archetype of player?
Well, it sounds like that you are, without actually doing it, it sounds like you're taking probably the two most popular options and putting them both in the bucket that you were describing. If you want the volume scorer, you're probably looking at LaVine. If you're looking at someone who's going to take the ball out of their hands a little more, you're probably looking at BI.
Okay, so Stephen P says Clay. Like, Clay is the name I thought of this morning, but there's not very many Clays. But yes, that idea. So let's take money out of the equation. Injuries out of the equation. Would you rather add BI to this team or Zach LaVine to this team?
If we're just taking money out the equation, I want everyone who's listening to this, because people come at me on Twitter all the time when it's like, well, you're not talking about the money. We're taking money out. We're going to take money out.
We're looking for an archetype because everybody likes to say they need. No, you can't say neither one because we're taking money out. Guys, we all like to say they need a second scorer, and then we say, well, this guy doesn't work, that guy doesn't work. Guys, we're taking health out. It's all out. All we're looking for is the archetype of player. That's all I'm asking.
Let me get my list out, because I have a list of players that are too good for the Pistons.
Because here's the other thing. People keep bringing up Naz Reid. Is Naz Reid the second? Like, is he the second option on a contender? I don't know that he is, as much as I love him. So again, very much clarifying for the final time. Archetype only. No injuries. Those sliders are off. The salary cap is off. What is the archetype between a Brandon Ingram versus a Zach LaVine that you think makes the most sense?
I'd be fine with either archetype because I see the argument for both. I completely agree with what you're saying, Bryce, and you've been on this, I think, for a while now about the Cade needs another guy who's just going to be a volume scorer next to him.
Yes.
And I completely get that. So I'm not opposed to that either. I think that is, I can see both. I tend to lean a little bit more towards BI.
Okay.
I'd like to, I want there to be a volume score, but I want to trust the playmaking with the ball in your hands as well. I want to trust that you can make the right read and that you have that those playmaking chops. And I think BI is really underrated as a playmaker. So I would go that route. However, like having a guy like LaVine who can just pop off for 40 like any given night and just like go on a heater of like 6 straight threes after like being off the entire night. Like, you know how much the Pistons would die to have a guy like LaVine do what they did against the Pistons? Like, it's a close game all throughout. He's struggling throughout the game. Then the fourth quarter, he just hits 6 straight threes. Like, it's just like they don't have someone that can just do that. So I'd say either one, but I tend to lean more towards BI because I like the playmaking, having more playmaking with it.
I think that's fair. I would take the Zach LaVine archetype. I've always thought that was the best archetype, and I still would stay there. What I like about BI is the size that would add to the lineup compared to adding a LaVine. So I'm cool with it. Again, Cliff, we're talking archetypes. I'm not talking about what we've actually seen BI do in the playoffs versus Zach LaVine in the play. Like, just archetype of player. I would go Zach LaVine archetype of player a little bit over BI, but I think I'm still on. I don't want to take the ball completely out of J.I.'s hands, and I don't want to take the ball completely out of Asar Thompson's hands, and that's why I'm a little more okay with LaVine, that type of player. Omari, same question. Again, for all the listeners, archetype only, Omari, because you'll really get aggregated. Like, people will be commenting on your articles and everything like that, just crushing you, yelling you at LCA about what you said. LaVine archetype, Brandon Ingram archetype.
I would go LaVine, and I'll throw out that last season around the trade deadline. It was some fake trade somebody pitched. It was like, would you do LaVine and Caruso for J.I. and like Sasser? And I was like, yes, like slam the button. And everybody was like, no. And now I'm like, if you look at it now, like LaVine and Caruso on this team, like this is a clear playoff team, like easy, But LaVine, I just like that archetype, like just a guy who could really heat up from 3 in a hurry. Plus athlete, like can handle some of the playmaking aspects. Like I just think his game fits Cade perfectly. I don't necessarily want a guy who's going to like split ball handling reps with Cade per se, I guess. Like, if the ball's in BI's hands, the ball's in BI's hands. Like, I don't know if he's playing off Cade as much, but LaVine, like a guy who's always going to be a threat wherever he's at on the floor. I like the idea of the LaVine next to Cade a lot. So that's the archetype I'm going with.
To the comments earlier, this is the Benedict Mather and Shaedon Sharpe argument, right? I feel like is the Zach LaVine archetype of player. Like, those guys just obviously haven't been at his level yet. They are still very young. I just think I think it's really fun to think about. I think we all agree on one thing. This team needs the second dude. Now, when do we think, right, Ku? Like, you may think it needs to happen at the trade deadline. I may be a little bit more comfortable waiting till the offseason. Let me ask you this. How would you feel if they signed a stopgap version of that? What if they just said, I don't think CJ is still playing quite at the level to be this, but what if they brought in, I don't know, whoever CJ McCollum is, like, is Anthony Simons isn't having a great year either. Do you think it needs to be the guy that can grow with Cade, or is it okay if they just went and got somebody like, hey, this is going to be a couple, because I bring this up this offseason, LaVine only has this bad contract for 2 more years.
I was literally just looking that up on my computer because people talk about stopgaps. I feel like LaVine could be, like, when people talk about you trade for LaVine, you're screwed for 5 years. You're really not.
Not anymore. Yeah.
He only has 2 years left on that deal after this year. So, like, he could be that stopgap. And the contract ends. He has a player option when he turns 31. So you're getting out of it before he turns, like, he's reaching the end of his prime, before he hits 33. That's why I've been on the LaVine train. I don't view it as I'll separate myself from Bryce and Omari. I want to make sure you guys don't get screwed over with this. I'm not talking about archetype in this comment right here. I'm talking about actually LaVine.
Archetype is over. Actual player, contract, health, everything. Real world, back to the real world.
I would take LaVine because I do view him as a stopgap. I think, like, I had a Philadelphia fan on my podcast last summer, and he spoke about how with the Sixers, they went out and paid a lot of money to JJ Redick, but it was for a 2-3 year span. It was an expensive contract, but it was to soak up the cap space for that 2 to 3 year span, help take the team to that next level during that time, and then you get out of it quick. And what happened during that time? I mean, JJ played the best basketball of his career. The Sixers probably played the best basketball of their career of their time with Embiid and Simmons. They were fantastic. And then you got out of their contract after that. And then after you get out the stopgap, you have an idea of, okay, this works. These guys got this much better. We need to go get this. And now we have the cap space to go do it. So that's why I've been on there with LaVine. He only has 2 years left after it. You're not stuck with him forever. And the Pistons are not screwed cap-wise. You get that stopgap. You see what he does for Cade. Where does he take Cade to? Heck, where does he even maybe take Ivy to? Whatever. Where does he take these players to? How much better can this team get during these 2 years with him? And then after that, you have much clearer answers on what the next step is after that for this team.
Stephen P says, what comes after the stopgap? You trade all your draft picks again, because at that time you would have access to all of them. That pick would be reconciled. I know it's scary, but we would be year 6 of Cade Cunningham at that point. You would know exactly what you have in J.I., J.D., Asar, Holland, what other picks. I know people ask about Bobby Clinton, Marcus Sasser, Stu, all of those guys. Then LaVine, you either just let him go in free agency, use him as the trade money in that trade, and you trade 3 picks to go get whoever that Devin Booker or whoever it is on the market at that point. I don't think it's ideal. I think it's an interesting idea, though, to get that stopgap guy to, show all of these things.
I just want to ask you guys, I want to ask you two a question real quick. So do you guys believe that if you were to have tried to get LaVine last year versus trying to get him from the Bulls now, do you think the price has gone up or down?
Up for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were trying to get off of that money last year, and now he's like a great contract.
He's been really good. Like, say whatever you want about injuries and all of that. He's 51, 43, 80 right now, and he's averaging 4.3 assists to 2.7 turnovers. He's like trying defensively. He's not a good defensive player. Like, we understand that, but he's very good right now. So if he plays this whole year, it's definitely up. So that's a good point, Steven, that you may have some issues there. Did this just come out?
I think it happened last night.
Oh, okay. People are saying, sorry for audio listeners, that B.I. sidelined indefinitely according to Shams. I would be surprised if he plays again before the deadline. B.I. needs to get traded before the deadline because he's an unrestricted free agent and there's not a whole lot of cap space out there. So if you want B.I. on the Pistons the next couple months, so where were you going to go with that in terms of LaVine's trade value up and down?
My point is that I feel like people don't take these things into account and they play scared. And I don't think that you want your GM to play scared. My point in saying that is players' values are lower. No one wants them. No fans want to trade for them. They're trash. Stay away from them. You don't want them. And then when their value when they start playing like how you usually did anyone actually think LaVine wasn't going to be good? Like, did anyone actually think LaVine wasn't going to get back to where like he was? No, but his value was low. People were talking bad about his contract, which it is expensive. He's overpaid, but it happens all across the league. When their players' value is low, no one wants them. Then when the value goes back up, now it's like, oh, well, go get him. Well, now you can't get him. Now you can't get him because his value went up. It's the same. Like, I think people need to understand. And it goes back to my conversation I had all offseason. Like, you're kind of starting to see this play out with Duren, that if you have to it's a risk either way. You have to take the risk that you feel most comfortable with. The risk, like with Duren, I was in the offseason saying I would trade one of them, Duren or Ivy. Now, Ivy's improved, so maybe it would have been bad to trade Ivy. But Duren, trade one of them, because if you let them play out, the risk is, okay, maybe they do get better and then their value goes higher, or we're talking after 25 games, sit him and now and bench him, and now his value is completely shot. It's the same thing with players like LaVine, like maybe even a Zion if he were to become available. Like, these players who they're really good, their value's low. That is the window of opportunity for a team like the Pistons, who don't have crazy assets, they don't have crazy picks. That's your window of opportunity to get a guy at low value and let him play it out with you and get high value. But if you just wait till everyone's at high value, you'll never get any of these players. It just won't ever happen.
Real quick, Mel says, but it's different for bad teams that aren't asset rich, isn't it? And Mel, I appreciate you in the chat. I feel like you've been very, like, I know you're taking a different side of this and I love it. I was like, I think even more so because they aren't asset rich, they have to take a chance. And it is scary as heck. I get it. I understand it, but eventually they have to do it. What were you going to say, Omari?
Yeah, I was just going to say, by acquiring Zach LaVine last season, either you get him essentially for free and just absorb cap money, or you get some sort of asset to take him. And that was another reason why I liked that deal for the Pistons last year, for getting him for that price, because one, you need assets, but two, the absolute worst case scenario was that you get a pretty good player who's hurt that becomes expiring the season after next, where you're probably not going to be a contender anyway. So, it's like old milk now, but in hindsight, it looks like that would have been a move that could have paid off for him.
Mel says, I don't know, reminds me of getting Blake Griffin. Omari says, lack of fear got us, these guys with injury. Like, I get it. Again, I'm just saying the one thing is you have to be smarter, right? Like, you got to be careful with these injury guys. I get that. It would depend on I don't know what it'll take to get Zach LaVine this offseason. Like, that's the other thing. If you told me they had to trade their 2 future picks or, whatever, then now you don't do it. So the other guy is Andrew Wiggins. Like, I think I was on an island saying I would buy low on Andrew Wiggins last year at the deadline. He's having a pretty good year this year. But, guys, like, he could have been awful still. So, it is what it is. So, yeah. Good point, Wes. The Pistons fans hate the Griffin deal, but you also hate the draft misses. So, which
That's
one?
why I've always defended the Blake deal, because I'm like, you never get a player of Blake's caliber in free agency. So that's a worthwhile deal to make. They just had horrible injury luck, which happens. But I've always defended that trade as well.
I'm with Omari, too. I've always defended that. Though, obviously, it didn't end up working out in the end.
Didn't work out.
I've always defended that decision.
Okay, last thing here, and then we'll get you guys out. Any updates on Bobby Clement? I know people were asking.
The team just described it as like a weird issue where he had fluid with his calf, and like he's literally been walking around and everything. It's not like it's just been like a weird recovery. So I wish I had more than that. Like, it doesn't sound like it's an inherently really serious issue at this point, but calves are weird, and they've just given it extra time to heal.
All right. Guys, if you were here live, thank you so much. The chat was popping. We truly appreciate it. Again, I always appreciate, like, you guys respectfully have conversations. You provide stuff to the podcast, all of that. Even if we don't agree or your point's a little bit different, we love it. We appreciate you. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, all of that. Make sure you're reading Omari on the Free Press. Make sure you're subscribed to the Motor City Hoops Substack, where I put out game notes and analysis, and we'll start to do NBA draft stuff down the road when it's a little bit closer. And then, of course, thanks to Ku, QT says it, elite guest. I feel bad for Wes because I knew the outline was just going to there was no chance we were following the outline today.
I call it Wes.
Listen, when I go on Locked On, Ku gets in trouble because I talk too much and we go too long. When Ku comes on the Pistons Pulse, he gets in trouble because we don't follow the outline. So, yes, Omari, we got some family drama. Mr. Sankofa says, my son, the Griffin deal will always be a sore spot between us. I love it.
All right, to my dad's credit, he didn't like the deal from the moment it happened. So I'll give it to
sounds
him.
like Christmas dinner is going to be very interesting at the Sankofa house.
No, this is old hat. Griffin's doing podcasts on YouTube. We're past it.
Ku, let them know where they can find you, and then we'll get everybody on with their Sunday.
You guys can follow me over on Twitter at Ku Khail. You can also find me over on, Blue Sky now, on also at Ku Khail. You can also find Locked On Pistons, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Also, you can find us over on YouTube, Locked On Pistons. Also, subscribe to my personal YouTube channel at Ku Khail as well. I do want to say to you, Bryce, real quick, Mel mentioned in the chat he doesn't think the Celtics would do a deal like that. They literally did it last year with Kristaps Porzingis.
All right, Omari, take it away, my guy.
All right. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes Davenport. As always, we'll make sure he gets the Pistons post in the YouTube next week. And we'll also talk to y'all next week. So thanks for tuning in.